The shift into this moment feels seamless, as if the stories of arrogance undone and dignity revealed were always leading here. Into a hall where polished walls and polished shoes cannot mask the raw tension thrumming beneath. The conference, in Washington, is staged like countless others before it, flags positioned perfectly, microphones gleaming, the hum of translators filling the air in soft undertones. Yet beneath this order lies unease, a quiet awareness that the young leader seated at the far end of the table is not one to bow easily. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in his plain military green uniform, looks out of place beside the suits and ties. But it is that very plainness that unsettles. He does not fidget, he does not posture. His stillness commands more than movement ever could. Every camera angles itself toward him. Every journalist's hand hovers, waiting for the words that will make or break the headlines of the day. The silence before the storm carries the weight of centuries of unspoken battles. It happens swiftly. Sharper than anyone expects, Maxine Waters leans forward, the gleam in her eye betraying the satisfaction of what she believes to be a killing strike. Her voice slices through the air, cold and dismissive. "Some call you a revolutionary," she says, letting the pause linger before tightening the trap. "But I call you what you are, a thug." The word lands like a weapon. The reaction is instantaneous. Gasps ripple across the chamber. Pens halt mid-stroke, and the diplomatic mask of decorum shatters under the weight of raw insult. Journalists exchange quick glances, each knowing instinctively that history has tilted in that single utterance. Cameras adjust, lenses narrowing onto the man in green, waiting for a flare of anger, for fire to erupt. But Ibrahim does not move. His composure holds. He lowers his eyes briefly, folding his hands deliberately on the table, and the silence he creates grows louder than the insult itself. Waters leans back in her chair, her smirk faint but confident, convinced she has won. The moment, she believes she has boxed him in with a word sharpened by years of racial undertones and dismissals. The narration lingers here, peeling back the layers of what that word has meant when spoken by the powerful to diminish the dignity of those who dared to rise. The insult is more than personal, it is systemic, carrying echoes of colonial disdain and centuries-old prejudices. Dragged into the present under the guise of political candor, for a moment, the room seems suspended in time, air heavy, eyes wide, no one daring to breathe too loudly. Then, with a slowness that magnifies the tension, Ibrahim lifts his head. His gaze is steady, piercing, not with rage, but with clarity. His silence has already unsettled the room, and when his voice comes, it is softer than expected. Deliberate, controlled, yet strong enough to command every ear. "Madam," he begins, each syllable weighted with respect but sharpened with truth. "In my country, a thug is a man who steals from the poor, who crushes the weak, who sells his people's future for his own comfort. If that is what you mean, then I am not the thug in this room." The words fall heavy, landing with a resonance that shakes the foundation of the hall. Murmurs scatter, an undercurrent of shock rippling through diplomats and journalists alike. Waters shifts in her seat, her confidence flickering for the first time. Cameras zoom tighter, trying to capture the subtle tremor in her expression, the falters she cannot hide. Ibrahim does not pause long enough for her to recover. His voice steadies further, gaining strength from its own restraint. "If defending my people from exploitation makes me a thug in your eyes, then I accept your insult as a badge of honor." The hall trembles under the weight of it. The audience stiffens, their silence thick with awe and unease. For the first time, they are not watching a mere exchange of political barbs, but something larger, something that feels like reckoning. Maxine Waters has no reply. The arrogance of her earlier words dissolves into wordless discomfort. And in that silence, the cliffhanger sharpens every person present, realizing they have witnessed not just a clash of words, but the beginning of a moment that will echo far beyond this hall. The silence that followed his words did not settle. It deepened, pulling every listener into its weight. What seemed a mere reply to an insult now pressed against the walls like a tide rising, uncontainable. And in that charged quiet, Ibrahim's mind drifted not to Washington, not to the rows of faces staring back at him, but to the red earth of Burkina Faso. 2 days when he was not a president, not a soldier, but a barefoot boy chasing education through dust. He remembered mornings when his small feet burned against hot ground on the long walk to a crumbling schoolhouse with no roof, where the rain turned their books to pulp and the sun scorched their heads. He remembered mothers bent double in the fields from dawn until night, hands blistered, backs aching, all for one loaf of bread to split among many mouths. He remembered fainting children, hunger silencing their laughter. These were not abstractions. To him, they were memories etched into his bones, the fuel for every word he spoke now. The narrative cut back to the hall, where his silence carried the gravity of those memories. Journalists leaned toward each other in disbelief. One, with pen still frozen above his notebook, whispered to a colleague, "This is no ordinary politician. He's rewriting the moment." A senator shifted uncomfortably in his seat, aware that something larger than politics was taking shape. Ibrahim reached into his worn briefcase, pulling out a photograph. He held it up, his hand steady, though his voice carried the raw edge of grief, carefully restrained. "These," he said, his accent lending rhythm to the syllables, "are the people I fight for. If my hands are dirty, it is with the dust of my land, not the blood of my people." The hall exhaled sharply. Eyes turned toward Waters, whose smirk faltered as the weight of his words pressed on her. She shifted slightly, lowering her gaze as if avoiding the photograph itself. Around her, murmurs swelled. A journalist, unable to contain it, whispered audibly, "She didn't expect this." A diplomat near the edge of the table muttered, "This is bigger than politics. This is dignity." The narration lingered on her silence, contrasting her earlier sharpness with the sudden hollowness now exposed. Ibrahim's mind flickered, again to flashbacks, villages ignored by aid that never arrived, reports of exploitation dismissed by global councils, lives devalued, and voices silenced by systemic indifference. He recalled protests where farmers begged for fair prices, only to be met with mockery. Young men branded violent for daring to demand opportunity, women shamed for speaking of hunger that never eased. He was not merely answering a personal insult, he was carrying centuries of unheard grievances to the center of power, making them visible through his own restraint. He did not raise his voice, he did not pound the table, he did not meet insult with insult. Instead, his calm became the indictment. Every pause a reminder of dignity weaponized against arrogance. His stillness unnerved them more than fury ever could. The narration painted the hall as a courtroom of history, with Ibrahim as both witness and prosecutor, forcing them to confront what they had long ignored. Waters' earlier insult, intended to diminish, now paled beside the enormity of what he represented. Beyond the walls, the world was already stirring. Phones buzzed, tweets multiplied, clips of his words spreading before the session had even ended. Not a thug, one hashtag read, a voice of Africa, read another. But, inside, the moment was not yet finished. Ibrahim's presence continued to unravel the insult, strand by strand, until it no longer belonged to him, but to the arrogance that had uttered it. The section closed on that quiet shift, the insult drained of power, dignity standing in its place, and the uneasy recognition that the world outside would not let this moment pass unnoticed. The momentum carried forward without pause. The conference hall, still humming with the aftershock of Ibrahim's restraint, turned into indictment. When the next session opened, the tension was already thick. All eyes darted to the far side of the table, where one chair stood glaringly empty. It was Waters' seat. The absence itself became a headline, cameras zooming in on it as though the silence of that chair spoke louder than any speech. Rumors spread in hushed exchanges. She humiliated, regrouping, or deliberately staging her next move. The uncertainty only sharpened the anticipation. Meanwhile, Ibrahim sat motionless, the same calm posture, as if untouched by either insult or speculation. His aides behind him carried the same quiet dignity, their faces set like stone. When the moderator finally leaned toward him and asked if he wished to continue, the entire hall collectively held its breath. Slowly, Ibrahim adjusted the microphone, the small movement drawing every eye. His voice, steady and low, carried across the room like a tide. "I am not here to fight names," he said, his tone clear, measured, unflinching. "I am here to fight hunger, poverty, and the chains that still bind Africa." The words landed like hammerstrokes, not loud but irrevocable. The narration lingered on the stillness in the room, eyes unblinking, pens frozen again, breaths shallow and synchronized as if none dared to exhale until he was finished. He did not pause for drama, only continued with that same calm strength. "Call me what you wish, but remember this, every insult thrown at me falls on the back of a people who only ask for dignity." The weight of those words pressed on every chest, reframing the insult from an attack on a man into an attack on a nation, a people, a history. Cameras caught the flicker of discomfort across faces once skeptical. A senator leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "This is no performance. This is truth." By midweek, the fire had leaped far beyond the hall. A private letter Ibrahim had written to his people was leaked, though no one knew how. Its lines spread like wildfire across continents. "If they call me a thug, let it be known I am the thug of the poor, the orphan, and the forgotten." The words were repeated on radio stations from Ouagadougou to Dakar, painted on walls in villages, turned into chants by students marching in Paris. Mothers whispered them to their children at night, as though reciting a prayer. Online, hashtags multiplied. Even critics who had mocked his youth or dismissed his rise grew quiet. The sheer dignity of his phrasing cutting through cynicism. The insult that had been meant to diminish him was now his anthem, reshaped into defiance and hope. When the week's most anticipated session began, the air was electric with expectation. This time, the once empty chair was filled. Maxine Waters had returned. The cameras captured her entrance, chin high, face carefully, unreadable, though her hands betrayed a faint tremor as they gripped the edge of the table. The moderator opened the floor, and for a moment she remained silent, staring down at her notes. Then, in a voice softer than her earlier sharpness, she began, "When I called you a thug, she said, pausing as the room stilled further. I spoke from ignorance and arrogance. Today, I stand corrected. You are a voice for the voiceless. The gasp that followed rippled through the chamber like a wave. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some nodding gravely, others squirming under the discomfort of watching one of their own collapse before truth. Ibrahim did not rush to reply. His gaze was calm, steady, his expression unreadable until he leaned closer to the microphone. His tone was not triumphant but solemn. Madam Waters, he said, his words slicing the air, you hurt me, but they wounded my people more. If you regret, then honor them not with apologies, but with action. The hall seemed to stop breathing. The narration lingered on her the collapse of power with noise and drama, but the quiet kind that shows in the glisten of eyes, the bowing of a head, the silence that swallows arrogance whole. She had no defense, no retort. Her silence became the confession. The eruption that followed was uncontainable. Applause roared, not polite but raw, surging from the audience like thunder rolling through the hall. Yet Ibrahim's face remained solemn. He did not smile, did not gloat. His victory was not in humiliating her, not in the spectacle of applause, but in showing that truth spoken with dignity can bend even the arrogant to silence. In that instant, the hall belonged to him, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had turned insult into revelation, proof that dignity wielded with calm strength delivers justice sharper than anger ever could. The transition is seamless. The storm of applause still echoing as the conference draws to its end. Yet the deeper resonance remains suspended in the air like an aftershock that will not fade. Delegates shuffle papers, cameras powered down, but no one leaves unchanged. Ibrahim's words are no longer confined to the hall. They ripple outward, carried by broadcasts, tweets, and whispered conversations. In Burkina Faso, parents repeat his lines to children by candlelight, their voices filled with pride. In Paris cafes, immigrants sip coffee and murmur his words as if they belong to them too. Farmers in dusty villages pause at the end of long workdays, their radios crackling with his speech, and for the first time in years they feel seen, their struggles dignified by one who stood unbound. Across continents, the insult intended to diminish him has been reforged into an anthem, dignity rising from arrogance's ashes. Meanwhile, the narration turns to Waters, her presence no longer triumphant but hollowed. She retreats behind closed doors. Her career's foundation rattled. The images painted are quiet yet devastating. Her scrolling endlessly through headlines alone in a dimly lit office, each headline cutting deeper than the last. Messages pile unanswered on her desk. Colleagues keep their distance. Neighbors who once greeted her with smiles now pass silently. In her mind, Ibrahim's words replay, the clarity of his calm conviction echoing louder with each attempt to dismiss them. It dawns too late that her arrogance had not just failed but crumbled before humility's weight, and no speech she could craft would rebuild what was lost. Ibrahim, in contrast, does not celebrate. There are no champagne toasts or grand statements. In his modest Washington hotel room, the walls bare and the furniture plain, he sits with his notebook open, pen moving slowly. His entry is simple, unadorned. No insult can shake a heart that beats for its people. The narration softens here, showing him pausing, head bowed, when his phone rings. On the line is his mother in Ouagadougou. Her voice, weathered but strong, carries warmth across the ocean. Remember, my son, you are never alone. Tears fall quietly down his face, not of pain or defeat, but of renewed resolve. The strength he carries is not his alone, it belongs to his people, to the memory of those fields, those children, those mothers whose burdens shaped him. The closing scene shifts away from grandeur into intimacy. A church basement in Washington where an immigrant congregation gathers. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, folding chairs creak, and yet here, Ibrahim kneels beside a weeping African mother. Her hands are rough, her clothes worn, but her words are steady as she clasps his hand tightly. They call you a thug, she whispers, voice trembling with both sorrow and pride, but to us you are hope. Cameras catch the moment, the humility of a leader, not behind podiums or conference tables, but on his knees in solidarity with the forgotten. The image spreads farther than any insult ever could, etched into the consciousness of millions as proof that dignity lives not in titles but in service. Narration ends in poetry, not thunder. True justice, it reminds us, is not delivered in roars of vengeance, but in the quiet strength of truth spoken with restraint. A final image lingers far from Washington, a child in Burkina Faso, sitting cross-legged beside his father as the old radio hums with Ibrahim's words. Wide-eyed, he leans closer and whispers, "He spoke for us." In that tender breath, the insult that once hung heavy is buried, replaced forever by the enduring resonance of dignity, a reminder that words meant to wound can be reclaimed into seeds of hope.